To Carly's Colorful Corner, where you will learn how to shade an adorable fox using pen and ink. Now, today I will be providing two different forms of instruction, one with a regular ink pen and one with a micron pen. Micron pens are super convenient because they kind of work like a graphite set of pencils, only for ink or archiving artists. So let's say your larger number is going to have a larger nub on the end of your pen, and this is going to allow you to get your darker darks a little more accurately and a little more quickly than if you were to use a regular pen. And it will take the guesswork out of the whole pressure thing that we'll be covering today. Now, if your number is a little is less or is smaller, then your nub becomes smaller and thinner. And that means that you have a thinner line, and a thinner line equals a thinner value, a lighter value, or a lighter shade on whatever you're drawing. So I highly recommend grabbing some of these at your local craft store, but they're not totally 100% necessary for doing our projects here in class. So for today's class, we will be covering a 4-3-2 formula. I call it the 4-3-2 formula because you're using 4 different layers, 3 different layers, 2 different layers, and 1 layer on your fox. But we are actually going to build from the bottom up. So let's add our 1 layer to the entire fox's body as a whole. Yes, the tail is stark white in the picture, but in real life, a fox's tail isn't going to be 100% white all around. It's probably going to have a cream color to it, so it's not going to be an actual true white like the area around your nose. So, with that being said, let's add 1 layer of ink throughout the entire fox's body. Now for this part of this lesson, I'm using a 03 micron pen. That means that the nub of my pen is not like super finite skinny, and it's not super thick either. It's the closest pen that I have to right in the middle of from light to dark. So I am moving across the body very lightly, and I am allowing some white between my scribbles to allow for some lighter shadowing to appear. Remember, the closer the scribbles, the darker the value or the darker the shade. The looser the scribbles, the lighter the shade, the lighter the value. So let's focus on the fox's body as a whole, and then we will move on to the next step here in a few minutes. Feel free to pause the video before moving forward. This is a fade in, fade out sequence. So when I fade in, I'm moving on to the next part of the lesson, and when I fade out, I'm finishing up that part and preparing for the next step. So if you need to pause, go for it. So the 4-3-2-1 formula is super simple. So we have 1 layer of ink right now on our paper. So any area that I have mapped out on our diagram that has the number 1, we're actually going to avoid putting ink on this area whatsoever. We've already put down our first layer for these sections. So our next step is to put another layer of ink on the rest of the body. So let's map out this area first before we get started. So the number 1 means 1 layer of ink, and then the number 2 means 2 layers, and so on and so forth. So let's take a peek at the diagram as we're drawing, just to make sure that we are not shading the areas that aren't supposed to be shaded. Now, if it says number 3, that's fine. For this step, we're literally putting a second coat of ink throughout the entire fox's body, and everything will work out just fine when we get to layer 3. So bear with me here, and then let's get started. As you're putting down your second layer of ink, you're going to want to do the same thing that you did for your first step. Keep your hand loose, let your hand glide across the paper, kind of like butterfly kisses. You want the roller part of your ballpoint ink pen or even your Bic pen, whatever it may be, you just want the tip of your pen to kind of brush against the surface of your paper. Now keep that white around the edges of your line by spacing out your scribbles. You already have layer one down, so layer one of ink will help cover some of those white spots that you'll be leaving behind on layer two. It will all come together. This is what we call building, and it's a gradual process. If you need to redefine your pencil line before moving forward, feel free to do so. We are going to erase all the pencil line at the end, so don't worry about, it looking weird because I promise you it won't. Can anyone guess what the next step is? If you are thinking, we're probably going to add our third layer of ink to the number three sections, then you are absolutely correct, my friend. Let's start doing that again, like kind of like what we did with our original step. Step number one, you're just gonna go through loosely and add another layer. I'm telling you, man, this is like piece of cake. This is easy as pie. You are gonna do fantastic. Oh, and for this portion, you're gonna want to vary your pressure just a little bit. Maybe make your hand a little bit heavier as you draw. If you're using micron pen, feel free to switch out to a 08 or a larger nub. Totally up to you. All depends on your personal preference, but this will help establish a darker value and help make your values pop when putting in your darker shades here. Now, I know I didn't add a number three to this section and I apologize, but I just noticed that there is kind of like a lighter shade or kind of like a lighter value on the top of the fox's spine. This is where the light, it looks like the light source is hitting the fox's back as he's bathing in the sun. So I am going to just ad lib here and very lightly scratch in my third layer. But I want this area to not be super, super dark, so I'm going to switch back to my 03. But if you're using a regular pen, you're just going to lighten your pressure and kind of stick to what we did with step one, which is light pressure, loose line. Don't forget to add some shadow to the underside of your fox's tail and kind of on the underside of the fox's paw. This is going to give you more of a three-dimensional effect. You can do this with a 08, just go very thin. Um, if you're using a regular pen, just vary your line pressure and keep your squiggly lines closer together as you add this additional layer of ink. Oh, and don't forget the underside of your fox's ear. I mean, come on, it's the furthest thing away from the light source, right? Is the underside of the body. So don't forget that area and the undersides of your fur tufts, so to speak. This will really help make your ears pop and your kind of separate the strands of fur or hair at the top of the head as well. Naturally, when you get to the number four areas of your fox's body, you are going to kind of deepen your pressure, tighten your squiggly lines, and that should really bring out your darker dark. At that point, for the number four areas, to ensure that I have enough darkness peeping through, I would switch over to a 08. But like I said, if you have a regular pen, this is super easy, adjustable. Just deepen your pressure and tighten your line. Right now is also a great time to check first to make sure that your ink is dry. And if it is dry, then feel free to erase all that pencil line on your paper. If it's not dry, give your project a rest until it is. You can check by touching your paper, and if any ink comes off your fingers, it's not safe to use an eraser on your piece right now. But if there is no evidence of ink on your finger, then you can proceed forward with erasing your pencil line and kind of touching up the areas that need more detail or more shade, so to speak. And from there on out, it's just eyeing what needs to be updated. If you are doing a touch up and you're working with areas with lower numbers, you're going to want to switch to a lower or a thinner nub pen. Or if you're using a normal pen, you're going to want to lighten your pressure and loosen your line. And that, my friend, is how you shade an adorable fox using pen and ink.